Let me start. I'm going to start broadly and focus in and then broaden out again. Let me start with a pessimistic view. I think human autonomy has very little chance against improving communications. Let me give you two examples of that at sort of a low level and a high level. And I apologize for the Americanism of some of what I'm going to say, and city names and things like that. I know these things better, North American kind. But 25 years, 30 years ago, a truck driver was told by his boss to get a load from Boston to San Diego in a week. And that was all his boss knew about. Whether the truck driver could manage extra time, haul a short distance load somewhere along the way, company policy might be against it, but there wasn't a great deal they could do about it. They wouldn't know where the truck driver stopped off to sleep, whether they stayed at a roadside inn or a whorehouse. The truck driver was a job with a great deal of autonomy. Now, back at the time that we wrote in the U.S. Constitution that the president was the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, we meant, roughly speaking, that the president got to appoint the senior officers, played a role in that, Congress confirmed them. The president got to give them orders at the level of, take a division down there, or more likely take a flotilla down there and deal with such and such a problem, and got them to commend them or court-martial them later when they came back from this event and the president heard their report. Fast forward to 1967, the U.S. spy ship Liberty is attacked by what turn out to be Israeli planes. The commander of the Sixth Fleet launches aircraft to protect his own troops, to protect the Liberty. And I apologize, I believe what I'm saying, I can tell you where I learned it, but the documentation is not so solid that one couldn't argue with it. However, I believe the commander of the Sixth Fleet, was called on a secure phone first by the Secretary of Defense, McNamara, and then by the President Johnson himself, and told to get those planes back on his decks. He was not to act to support his own troops. Right, so at a very high level in society and quite a low level in society, merely improving communications have taken in principle authority structures and made them real. And I see every sign of this going on down to sort of regulating this from second to second. Now, accompanying this is the fact that, loosely speaking, business is anti-privacy. I'll give you sort of three statements of this. First, it's really essential in business to violate your customer's privacy. That is for you to violate it, for you to know things about your customers. What businesses call their confidential customer data is one of their tremendous competitive advantages. They may, and it was traditional in many businesses, in particular with lawyers and accountants, but by a number of things, businesses would protect their customers' data from other people. And therein, their interests were aligned with their customers. They were trying to keep their customers' data largely away from their competitors. In the course of that, have policies that kept it away from other people. And that second practice is declining a great deal, and markets in data acquired by businesses about their customers are becoming a major force in modern business. Now, nobody I know of has figured out how to make a killing in business. Some people have stayed in business by respecting and protecting the privacy of their customers. This is often gratuitous. There are lots of things around that could be done locally. These appointment services and so forth on the web, or people who wanted to keep your address book. All those things, in my view, ought naturally to be done on your own laptop, your own telephone or something. Lots of storage available these days. But the fact is, what people know how to do is make money by centralizing it and interacting with their customers, and thereby moving them on toward services they can charge them for, up from initial services that they usually don't. So curiously, I find myself liking Microsoft better these days. Microsoft, one of the remaining defenders, you know, they make programs to run on your PC and do things for you, as opposed to the more modern style, which is to offer you services over the web so that everything you are doing is fundamentally knowable to somebody else. And I think Ross invited me the notion that I would say something about what we call crypto wars, or the crypto war in the 1990s. And unfortunately, I don't think there is as much analogy as I would like there to be. Roughly speaking, in that era, governments, very particularly the US government, became worried that they wouldn't be able to acquire the information, you know, some of it legitimate, maybe some of it illegitimate, that they needed to acquire in criminal matters, in national security matters, in other ways, about communication among the citizens, because the cost of cryptography was dropping, and both sides of that argument somehow we imagined it would be a lot more successful than it has been. So they were trying to prevent people from doing something. One, that they wanted to do. Two, that they felt they had a right to do. And three, that seemed easy to do. You had to go out of the way to stop them from doing it. Now, the new flight seems to me, I'm afraid, the shoe is on the other foot. We are trying to prevent governments. We, some amorphous notion of the people, the good people, the right people, men up my name, Jacques is my name, that sort of thing. People prevent the government from doing something it wants to do. Something it feels very strongly it has the right to do. And more than that, it feels is essential to protect society, and just incidentally, perhaps essential to stay in power itself. So, on the face of it, on the form of it, it's not so obvious to me that was likely to prevail in this argument as we did in the previous one. And just incidentally, the hidden elephant in the previous one was that the interests of groups like Liberty and the ACLU and the EFF and the Electronic Privacy Information Center were aligned with the interests of large organizations, in many respects like Microsoft, like Sun, the business community. Whether that same alignment occurs now, I don't know. Now, focusing in a little bit on what we seem mostly to be talking about here, the essence of communication security comes down to two problems, and one proved much more tractable than the other. One is protecting the content of messages. Right? 1890s, that was done by putting them in envelopes and sending them by couriers, and a very effective technique in lots of ways, somewhat different security characteristics. After radio, the only thing available to do it in a lot of circumstances was encryption. And as I said, that does a pretty good job of protecting the content of communications. Protecting the traffic data, what you're calling the comms data, or something like that, proves much more difficult. And let me give you three examples of three different time scales. Let's imagine we look back to the 19th century. Listen, I don't know British law on this, but in the US law, looking at the address data on an envelope and the franking and all that was called mail cover, and could be done with much less, I think it did require some authorization, but with much less authorization than was required to open the letter. And I grew up in an era when it was the myth that first-class mail was sacrificed, saying it could never be opened. And that turned out, began studying the subject, not to be true, but it took a warrant to open the letter. That may have been violated in certain cases, etc. But the formal process, the judge is almost exactly parallel to what was taken over for pen register to look at calls that are being made, and wiretap to access the content of the calls. Now, so that means in the 19th century, if I send a letter somewhere and you look at that letter, you don't get very much information about it. The problem is, following may be fanciful, I don't know of a case of it, but suppose I'm doing something like negotiating a deal or applying to college or I don't know what, right, that involves dozens of letters over a period of 6 months. Now, if you're allowed to know where all of those letters go and when, and the repetition rates, there might be, ping pong of letters back and forth to certain places. Now you might get a pretty good view of what I was up to. But after all, it's a matter of an investigation that went on for, say, 6 months. Let's look at the 1980s. I remember employing the following precise security measure. I would phone Harvard University, and then I would ask for someone's extension. Now, at that time, that involved talking to an operator. Probably not much record was kept of that. Particularly critically, no record of that was available in my organization that I was calling from. And as to whether, you can leave it up to your imaginations. Where I was talking to people who didn't want known they were talking to me, I was just talking to my friends and, didn't want the company to know I was running up a large bill. Actually, they knew I was running up a large bill, they just didn't know how. Now, a little later, that kind of thing got automated, right? So even if I can call Harvard University's main number, and some mechanical voice will ask me, if you know your party's extension, you may dial it now. Now, the jargon for that in the police intercept business is called cut-through digit dialing. And if you sit down to write the rules about what they're allowed to see, well, are they allowed to see that one or not? And I don't keep track of that fight probably continues today, but that was a major point in wiretap and intercept law about whether that was part of the content and you needed a wiretap warrant, or whether it was part of the pen register and you just needed a court order. Now, if you run that forward to the present, you're looking at clickstream data. And if I go click into a particular web page, just incidentally, that's the point at which it's very convenient, I go to Gmail and I encrypt my communications with Google and things like that. That's the point. There's a coincidence here between the facility of the protective measures and the sort of, issue of equities about what it is that's appropriate. So if I make a single connection to web location, and then I got lots and lots of data out of it, you can't see anything within the structure of those data, then you don't learn a lot from watching my clickstream. If, on the other hand, I do what describes maybe most things on the web, which is each web page I come to instantly offers me a dozen others likely to be outside of its own organization. Even if many of these things are encrypted, the handoffs and such will be visible. So now you get a much, much more detailed view of what I was doing than you got before. So I'm suggesting in some sense the problems aren't new, but the same fundamental structure of communications has existed over quite some period of time at different scales of operation. But the scaling is critical, and as everything gets faster and faster, you get more and more information about your target in less and less time. So the final thing I want to say is just a truism, which is I think these subjects all depend, I think the welfare of society depends on the coordination of three things, and if you get them out of harmony, you get yourself into trouble. And the three, and you can put them in whatever order, depending on your trade, some will be more important than others, but the three are law, technology, and business. And we have to consider all three types of issues in working on these problems. Thank you.